All right, guys, let's see if this will work. So I'm going to do notes this way so I don't have to be on Zoom. You guys can just watch this lecture on your own and take notes over it. So I do expect you to watch it. I do expect you to take notes over this stuff. I'm not posting the PowerPoints. This is the only way you're going to get it. Okay. So we're going to start out with civil rights under the Kennedy administration. I know we've kind of been jumping around. It's really hard with all the different factions of the civil rights movement and all the presidents involved. It's kind of hard to keep a very solid timeline where it's like very fluid and flowing. So it may have seemed a little jumpy. That's okay. Hopefully you guys were introduced and enjoyed talking about Malcolm X yesterday and kind of the alternative views that him and the Black Power movement presented, and kind of see the positive aspects of that too, because I think sometimes textbooks or just society as a whole presents Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and Black Power in these very negative ways, but they're not. They're just different ways. And sometimes they don't run parallel to the ways MLK went about it. But we're back to the MLK storyline today. All right, so we have not got to talk about the 60s in politics, right? We jumped right from the Cold War to the Civil Rights Movement. So we haven't really got to talk about Kennedy yet, beyond the fact that, yeah, he was president. Yes, he definitely took into account all the different aspects of the Civil Rights Movement, openly supported it. So during the 1960 campaign or election, when Kennedy was running against Nixon, which we'll talk about next unit, he had a large support from the African American voters in the community. They knew he was pro-civil rights, but no one really knew how much he was going to step in. And we've kind of seen some of this already, right? We've jumped around. So when it comes to Kennedy, he had a history when he worked in the government, prior to running for the presidency, that showed that he would support civil rights bills in the Senate, in terms of he would vote in support of them. But once again, you had a person who was not going to be like fully vocally outright about civil rights, because it could burn bridges and could lead you not to be elected president. So the first thing he had to do was become elected. And then after he did, he had to kind of pay his dues to show he knew what he was doing, and then slowly enter the field of civil rights. We had talked about the Birmingham marches and the Birmingham campaign kind of being the turning point to some extent during his presidency, where he decided he was really going to get involved. Knowing this would anger the Southern Democratic states, he did make statements about it. But once again, in 1964, he was going to be running for re-election, and he really needed those Southern votes. So he was very slow moving on it at first. So we preach freedom around the world, and we mean it, and we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to sit in the world, or are we to say to the world, sorry, I can't type. Are we to say to the world, and much more importantly to each other, this is a land of the free except for the Negroes. This time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. So eventually he does clearly take a stand on this. We have already talked about Medgar Evers being killed in his front lawn. And that same night, Kennedy goes on TV. The Birmingham marches have happened. Kennedy comes on. He gives that speech that I made you guys watch, where he basically says, now's the time. Now's the time to address civil rights, and now's the time we're going to do something about it. He takes a very firm stand on where he positions himself on civil rights. And it's basically him saying he's introducing a civil rights bill to Congress to achieve federal equal rights for people of color. So when he makes this announcement that basically he's going to be putting the government in position to vote on a civil rights bill, he has to gain support for it. Senators, congressmen, they have to support and vote on this, otherwise it's not going to happen. And so this is where the March on Washington comes into play. Most people know the March on Washington because it's the place that Martin Luther King Jr. gave the I Have a Dream speech. The thing is, when this was advertised, and the purpose of it was to gain and garner support for a civil rights federal bill to be passed. Instead of Kennedy going out and just schmoozing people, which he was doing already to gain support for his bill, they held this kind of rally, this march, this gathering. And so these very famous pictures are from the reflection pool out in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And this is held in August of, here, let me move this so you guys could see, of 1963. And there's keynote speakers that are going to be there. There are musicians, there's famous actors. So most people just get the, oh, this was MLK's speaking thing. Yes, that was a big piece of it. It was an iconic piece of it, but there was a lot of other things going on. A lot of other people spoke about their perspectives on this stuff. And you had this kind of claim to fame where you had all these celebrities coming in, getting involved as well. And so, come on. So you had over 200,000 people, almost 250,000 people came. Everything was peaceful. It was orderly. Everything was calm. And so here's like some celebrities, if you've heard of them. They are very iconic people in pop culture. Sammy Davis Jr., Jackie Robinson, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul, and Mary. So like all of these celebrated celebrities came out to help the cause. Now, the thing, like I said, that is most iconic is King being up on the Lincoln Memorial steps and giving his I Have a Dream speech, saying what he dreams the future of America looking like. And the whole point is, if we can get a civil rights bill passed, maybe we'd be one step closer to that. So I always make kids listen to a little bit of the I Have a Dream speech. I always assume that you guys have listened to it in other classes, and then I'm always sorely mistaken when it seems like a lot of kids really haven't heard it before. They just know about it, and every teacher assumes you guys have heard it. So, no, I just had it up on my computer. What happened? Okay, one sec. Let me pause. Okay, let's try this because now it's working on here.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
So usually when kids think about this, they often think of the whole piece where he says, one day I dream that, little black children and little white children will be able to hold hands and gather and play together. And so it gets people really excited about what the future may hold. But also, once again, they have to get this bill passed. Kennedy has to get this bill passed. The thing is, despite this great turnout, besides this historic speech that is given, Kennedy is not able to push it through Congress. The southern states are not listening to him. They do not care to listen to him. They don't want this bill passed. Kennedy doesn't have the support. He doesn't have the force and pressure. He just can't do it. He can't get it done. He does not have the numbers. So we've already talked about it, but in 1963, in November of 1963, Kennedy is assassinated. And so his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, he comes about, and while him and Kennedy viewed things very separately and very differently, and for the most part, he knew that the one thing he had to do for Kennedy was get the Civil Rights Act passed. Johnson is from Texas, so he has some Southern pull. He's also a very intimidating man who knows how to put pressure on people. And after this, he starts gaining support for that Civil Rights Act. And so the House passes it, but to get things approved, you need the House and the Senate to both pass it. The civil rights opponents in the Senate, the Southern states, filibustered. It's a technique where you prevent a vote from happening by just nonstop talking. And so, like, people that have filibustered in the Senate, they might do things like bring in a phone book and just read the phone book for hours. Or they may bring in 20 Dr. Seuss books and read through them. Or if they have a very amazing ability, they just get up there and they talk for hours about nothing. But either way, when you talk that much and you don't stop, it doesn't give them a chance to call for a vote. And so it ends up that the time passes and the bill can't be voted on. And so it dies. Johnson, though, he counters the filibuster. He calls something called a cloiture. And with this, they vote to limit the debate and call for a vote. They shut the filibuster down, which this often does not happen. So with this, the Senate votes on it, and then they also vote to pass the bill. A majority of them do support it. So here you have a picture of Johnson, and you have MLK in the background watching the Civil Rights Act of 1964 be passed, which is a big deal. So some of the things that it says is it bans the use of different voter registration standards for Black and white people. It didn't eliminate those literacy tests, though. You know, that thing I gave you guys and said if you got 100 on it, that I'd give you an A in the class and not ask anything else of you. Literacy tests don't go away. They claim that they require it for both Blacks and whites, so that's how they get around it. But in reality, they're usually only giving it to Blacks, and if they're giving it to whites, they're claiming the whites pass and the Blacks don't. So other examples of these literacy tests that stick around, unfortunately, I think that in the movie Selma, one of the opening clips, where they try to show Oprah Winfrey's character trying to apply for the right to vote. This is her application process where they don't give her a written literacy test, but it's still a literacy test that they do here.
You work for Mr. Dunn down at the rest home, ain't that right? Yes, sir. Wonder what old Dunn will say when I tell him one of his gals down here stirring a fuss.
I ain't stirring no fuss. I'm just here trying to register to vote.
Recite the Constitution's preamble. You know what a preamble is?
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union.
How many county judges in Alabama?
67.
Name them.
So I think that's like a really poignant example of what a literacy test is, asking these ridiculous questions. Most people can't even recite the preamble, but she could, and knowing how many judges there are, like all of these things. So this doesn't get rid of that, unfortunately. It does prohibit discrimination in public accommodations, so restaurants can't be segregated, or there can't be different accommodations, hotels, theaters. So that's a good thing. Allowed the withholding of federal funds from programs that practice discrimination. So now it could hit companies or businesses or whatever in the pocketbooks if they were not following these rules, which money tends to speak, while other things seem not to. So another big one here is it banned the discrimination based on race. Eventually sex is added. Religion, national origin by employers. So sex is not originally in there. It gets added later on. But all of this stuff is language we look at and use today when it comes to looking towards discrimination, what it means, and that we can fight it in the courts. It was kind of laid out in the Civil Rights Act, so that's why it's such a big deal. Now, I'm going to flip to a different PowerPoint because I like it better. We're going to do new share here. And so if we look at setbacks and successes in all of this, we just did the Voting Rights Act, right? No discrimination in the workforce, no discrimination in public facilities. If you are violating these, you can be prosecuted. So all this is very positive stuff. This is a success we see within the movement. Does not mean fighting is over. The Freedom Summer happens, and this is some of those civil rights groups we've talked about, like SNCC, and they have 1,000 volunteers who want to go register people to vote. If Black people have the right to vote, because it is their constitutional right, then these guys are going to go down and help them register. So you have whites and Black students go to do this. They go into Mississippi, notably a very dangerous, segregated place in the United States, but they go down to help. And things get rough. So during this time, you have the disappearance of 3 volunteers that are registering people to vote. So they're on their way back from registering people to vote one day, and they're supposed to go back to their hotel. And they never make it. So people are looking for them. They can't get a hold of them. They can't find them. They don't know what happened. They have no clue. And they just know that they saw them leave. They were driving home, all 3 of them in one car, and they were never heard from again. The president sends federal marshals down to Mississippi to investigate, to see what has happened. Now it's Mississippi. They know there is a lot of KKK activity down there. They know that there are some pretty strict social standards in place when it comes to the races down there, unfortunately. And they're not one who are really complying with what is being told. So eventually the bodies are found, and it was discovered that they were gunned down by members of the KKK. When they were driving, they probably got run off the road or pulled over in some way. They were shot, and then the body and the car were hidden. And it turned out that the police down there had police officers who were members of the KKK, and it was all kind of just this massive cover-up. And it really showed people how ingrained racism was in the culture in Mississippi and how dangerous it still was, even when there are these non-discriminatory laws that are placed out there by the federal government. So if you like this story is interesting to you for whatever reason, there is a movie about it. Let's see if my old trailer will work. I love this movie, but it's old, but it's pretty deep.
I am sick and tired of going to the funerals of Black men who have been murdered by white men.
They are powerless against us if every single Anglo-Saxon Christian one of us stands together.
The rest of America don't see it that way, Mr. Mayor. The rest of America don't mean a damn thing. You in Mississippi now.
Hopefully you guys are seeing the screen. You probably aren't. Sorry.
You had us scared to death, man.
Don't you call me man, boy.
Did it ever occur to them they're going to end up dead? The moment those 3 kids disappeared, it was news. The moment the 3 civil rights workers disappeared, it was news. You'd kill Frank? Is that what you're saying? I wouldn't give it no more thought than bringing a cat's name.
people crawled out of a sewer, Mr. Ward.
We do not accept Jews because they reject Christ. We do not accept papists because they bow to a Roman dictator. We do not accept Turks, Orientals, nor Negroes.
We're not killers. That's the difference between them and us.
That's the difference between them and you. Did you smile when the bulldozer ran over the black kid's body?
We're here to protect Anglo-Saxon democracy and the American way.
What's wrong with these people?
1964, when America was at war with itself.
I know the trailer is pretty dramatic, but pretty good movie. Let me get out of here before it starts sharing something else. We don't want to watch that. Okay, so let me go back. Okay, so with this, there's still, I mean, just because a federal law is passed does not mean that things are even close to okay at this point. Now, a person that I've mentioned in passing is John Lewis. So he died in 2020. He was a senator when he passed, and it was a big deal. And so a lot of people don't know who John Lewis is and why he was so important. Yes, he was a senator. Yes, that's a big deal. It's a high position to hold in our country. But John Lewis is famous because he's a civil rights leader. So here's a super short, like 1.5, 2-minute biography about him. And then we'll kind of give you some context about historically what were his big moments.
John Lewis is from Alabama, and he's the chairman of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Almost every civil rights event and confrontation, John Lewis was playing a role throughout the 60s. He is working on strategy, tactics. He's at the very center of the civil rights movement. SNCC had been in Selma since early 1963. King arrives January 2nd, 1965. And so by time the world focuses its attention on Selma, students had been organizing and thousands of people had been arrested in Selma for the preceding 2 years. John Lewis is a part of that. The students of SNCC vote not to participate in the Selma to Montgomery March. They didn't believe in these big stage demonstrations. They thought they were counterproductive. They thought they were more cosmetic. They believed in grassroots organizing. They want to organize poor people to take control over the political process.
And so John Lewis decided he wanted to march, even though the organization had voted not to march. He said he would march as an individual and not represent the organization.
John Lewis, very instrumental in giving the kind of leadership that we felt was needed in order to actually continue our march. And because of his particular leadership, he came and joined our group, that front line of that march.
He stays side by side with the SCLC and Martin Luther King for the duration of that campaign. So the victory that comes out of the Selma to Montgomery March, that culminating victory, that also includes all of those episodes that occurred beforehand. John Lewis was a part of that.
So that's like a smattering of things he was involved in, right? He was a key player in so many parts of the civil rights movement. Now, the one that he probably is most notable for, as far as in the 60s, was the March on Selma. So down south in Selma, you had a lack of compliance with letting Black people register to vote. And they had literacy tests in place. They had poll taxes. And so Martin Luther King and his SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they decide they're going to stage a march. They are going to march, and it's going to be peaceful, but they're going to march, and they are going to basically demand that people get to register to vote. Like, that's the goal of this. And so they get there, and this huge group shows up to march, and they come across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is still named that today. Edmund Pettus was actually a member of the KKK. And so there's a lot of contention on should the name be changed of that bridge or not. But These peaceful protesters march over the bridge, and they face a line of police officers. And the police officers tell them to disband. And before they're even actually allowed to consider disbanding and, going back, they're just walking peacefully, and they stop to listen to the officers. The officers charge at them. And this event becomes known as Bloody Sunday. So John Lewis, he was a member of SNCC. SNCC did not participate in this. John Lewis decided he was going to, on an individual basis, not to represent SNCC, but to go. And he was right up front with a lot of these very important civil rights leaders during this march. People respected him and knew him, and so he was there. And he was there on Bloody Sunday, as it was called. So the first attempt to march over this bridge, they are met with brute force by the police officers. Trying to find pictures here. Maybe I don't have any. I guess this is the closest that I have. They charge at them. They tear gas them. They beat them with police, the nightsticks. These people were just walking. They were just walking across the bridge, and they stopped to listen to the officers, and they are charged, and they are beaten and chased. And so eventually, after this outbreak of violence occurs towards them, they flee, and the federal government is made note of what is happening, and they are brought in to protect the marchers, and King shows up this time and marches with them. So this picture down here, I believe, is the initial attempted march, I believe. Down here, and this is John Lewis, and then this is John Lewis in the second attempt to march. So this is John Lewis's account of what happened, because, yeah, I am a history teacher and I can try to recount it, but why wouldn't we listen to somebody who was there and experienced it and can tell you about it?
There was so much hope, so much optimism after the March on Washington. When people left, as Dr. King suggested, we went back home, back to the heart of the Deep South. So many of us went into the state of Mississippi. We went into Alabama. We went to Selma. In Selma, only 2.1% of African American were registered to vote. The only time you could even attempt to register to vote was the first and third Mondays of each month. You had to stand in line, get a copy of the so-called literacy test. And hundreds and thousands of people would fail the so-called literacy test. They were told they could not read or write well enough. African American lawyers, doctors, teachers. So we started a series of demonstrations, standing in line at the courthouse. One evening, there was a demonstration for the right to vote nearby Selma. Confrontation occurred, and a young man tried to protect his mother. He was shot in the stomach, and a few days later, he died at the local hospital in Selma. We made a decision to attempt to march from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people of color wanted to register to vote. We started walking. I was one of the leaders of that effort. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. In this backpack, I had 2 books. I thought we were going to be arrested and that we were going to go to jail, so I wanted to have something to read in jail. I wanted to have something to eat in that backpack. I had an apple and I had an orange. Since I thought we were going to be arrested and go to jail, and I'd be in jail with my friends, my colleagues, and neighbors, I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. I had toothpaste and toothbrush. We get to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. We continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. And a man spoke up and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. It would not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your homes or to your church." And a young man walking beside me by the name of Jose William from Dr. King's organization said, Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray before we can pass word back for people to kneel and pray. The major said, troopers advance. And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, tramping us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. Was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. I thought it was the last nonviolent protest for me. I don't recall how I made it back across that bridge, across the Alabama River, through the streets of Selma, back to that little church. But I do recall being back at the church. It's full to capacity. More than 2,000 people on outside trying to get in to protest what had happened. Someone asked me to say something, and I stood up and said something like, I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam. And can I send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote? And the next thing I knew, I'd been admitted to the Good Samaritan Hospital there in Selma, Alabama, with 16 other people. And the next morning, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his colleague, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, came to visit us in the hospital. And Dr. King said, don't worry, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery if we get a Voting Rights Act passed. And he told us that he had urged religious leaders to come to Selma. So on Tuesday, March 9th, more than 1,000 ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns came to Selma. And they marched to the point where we had been beaten 2 days earlier. That Tuesday night, one of the young ministers went out with 2 others to find something to eat. And on the way back from the little restaurant, they were attacked by members of the Klan. This young minister, James Reed, was from Boston. He was so severely beaten, he was taken to a hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, where he died 2 days later. Selma gave us the Voting Rights Act, the way Birmingham gave us the Civil Rights Act, and the March on Washington gave us the Civil Rights Act. Hadn't been for Selma, hadn't been for the March on Washington, we wouldn't be where we are today. And there would be no Barack Obama as President of the United States of America.
So, in 2015, they redid this march, the Selma March. And so at the front here, you have Barack Obama next to John Lewis. And then you have a smattering of other people who had marched in this originally too and redid it again. So it's a very important moment. They have it all over television. It's very symbolic and just very important. So in 1965, like John Lewis is talking about here, the Voting Rights Act did occur because of Selma. So under Johnson again, this banned literacy tests and said that was no longer something you could use to register. You can't give any kind of test. If somebody meets the requirements to vote, meaning you're a citizen and you're over the legal age, like that's it. That's all you got. You don't have to prove anything else. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to go through any extra hoops. And then that poll tax would eventually be ruled out by the 24th Amendment. So banned all poll taxes. And it was around the same time court cases made it to the Supreme Court to fight discrimination as well. So we have gerrymandering kind of addressed, not fixed. It limited it. Gerrymandering is still something that is questioned in the courts. And I can't remember when the last case, I mean, it was very recent that they hear a case about it, or there might even be one. Maybe there's one coming up. So, I mean, by all means, legal issues with racism and systemic racism are not done, not even close. But these are all steps in the right direction. And so about a week after the Voting Rights Act was passed, you did see violence, so the Watts riots. And so because of discrimination still in place, it was instances where maybe peaceful protest did not win out. In these cities where you did have racial tension, they kind of came to a peak at this time. So you did see flares. This was in 1967. King is still around. He is still trying to help lead the civil rights movement, and doesn't condone this kind. But people are frustrated. People are upset. They are sick of police brutality towards people of color. They are annoyed with discrimination still being seen within their neighborhoods by white business owners and stuff. I mean, it's a lot of tension. Again, it's kind of been there forever, and it just kind of hit a peak. Now, the Kerner Commission, they were given a job to investigate these race riots. They wanted to figure out, like, is there a race problem in America? Why did these happen? What could have ever been the cause of these riots? And so what they concluded was long-term racial discrimination was the most important cause of violence. When they looked at events like this, it was because these people had faced long bouts of oppression due to racism. And they gave the advice that if they wanted to discourage violence, or not even discourage, but stop or limit the violence in some of these urban areas, that they needed to go fix the urban ghettos. These places that they had promised money before and then turned their backs on and let them become, more rundown. And in these areas where they weren't funding, people of color lived there and things got rough. And now these are the areas you see the violence popping up in. And so it's great. The Kerner Commission says, hey, you could fix this by investing money and fixing them up and, helping end years of discrimination based on race. And the federal government said, oh, okay, thanks for investigating that. But yeah, we are starting the Vietnam War now, and we have that going on. So, yeah, they didn't ever go and fix this. The Kerner Commission made a suggestion, and it was not followed because the government felt money needed to be spent elsewhere, like a war. All right, so I'm not going to do this because you guys already did this with Mr. Reuters yesterday. But we will get to the part where, we had Malcolm X was assassinated. You also have MLK in 1968. MLK is trying to rally for a poor people's campaign, so people who are poverty stricken, and he's not addressing just racial inequality. He's also addressing socioeconomic inequality for any race. He goes down to Memphis, Tennessee, and while he's down there working on this poor people's campaign, he is supporting a strike going on for sanitation workers, kind of doing all these great supportive roles. And he's standing on his balcony at a motel, and he is shot by James Earl Jones. And so this is a picture immediately after it happens, with King laying on the ground there, and these three, friends of his pointing to where the shot came from, because it was directly in a room across from where King was staying. King unfortunately dies from his injuries, and it kind of feels like the end of the civil rights movement for a lot of people, unfortunately. And after this happens, people riot. People get really, really upset. And Kennedy's dead, who was a supporter of civil rights. Lyndon Johnson is there too, and he's supportive, it seems, of civil rights to some extent, but he's really focused on Vietnam. The next upcoming person for election is potentially Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's brother. And he is campaigning for the Democratic nomination for president in 1968, the same year King shot. And so while he is out there campaigning, that's when they get the news that King has been shot. And everyone knows how horrible that's going to go over, especially with the Black community. And RFK is notably, telling people how upset he is of it too, and how we have to keep doing what MLK would want and use peace and nonviolence, and we have to process the news this way. Where he's at, it kind of holds for a bit, but eventually riots break out. Like, people see it as MLK was all about peace, and that's how you achieve change. And if you're just peaceful enough, you know, people will figure it out, and differences will be made. But King is ended by violence, and so people kind of, for a moment, think maybe peace doesn't work. Maybe violence is the only thing that can cause change, because look at what they did to our leader. He's peaceful. He never hurt anyone, and now this is what's happening to him. And so there are a lot of riots the day or the evening after MLK is killed. And so all of these riots break out across cities, across the country. And it's just, people are frustrated, understandably so. And then you have RFK, who's kind of this other glimmer of hope. He openly supports civil rights. People liked his brother. And when he's campaigning in California, after a speech he gives when he's almost won the Democratic nomination, he's gunned down in the kitchen 2 months later, after he leaves his speech there. And so in 1968, you have him killed. So you have Kennedy killed in 63. You have Martin Luther King Jr. killed. You have Robert F. Kennedy killed. You have Malcolm X killed. All of these leaders that people saw as hopeful to change the world and help with civil rights, they're gone. And people almost don't know where to go. And like, unfortunately, that's where our book like leaves it. It's like, okay, end of the civil rights movement. These people died. So then it's like, cliffhanger. What happened? Did it work? Did they win? Did we win the civil rights movement? What did it do? It's like a cliffhanger. Here's the deal. Look at where we're at today. Now, de jure segregation, gone. We no longer have legal segregation. You can't create somewhere and say white people go here, black people have to go here. That's illegal. There was an increase in political involvement of African Americans. You saw more African Americans being eligible to vote or being allowed to vote because they could register now because of no poll tax, no literacy tests. You had, because of higher black voters, you had more people of color being put in positions of governmental power. Senators, House representatives, governors, all this stuff. Poverty rates in black communities fell and income rose from the beginning of the civil rights movement till, the end of this. Thurgood Marshall eventually becomes the first black Supreme Court justice. But obviously, look at what happened this summer across our nation. Things are not okay. Things are not right. This movement is not done. If anything, I kind of see 2020 as seeing a resurgence of it. We had it in the 60s, and now it's like back again. It never died. It never died. It just, we didn't notice it as much, especially in the white community in Omaha. I would say it was almost like it was just not dormant. I don't like that word either. It wasn't dormant. People have always been fighting for this stuff. They've not stopped ever. It's just now, because of social media, because of the news, because of what happened this summer, it's mainstream. People see it. There's more people participating in it. And I don't think it's probably going to slow down anytime soon. And people are still calling for these changes. So it's important stuff to listen to. All right. Well, that is all I have to say about the civil rights movement for the day. Hopefully, let's see how long this lecture is that I just recorded. When you're done with this, if you have time, go and keep working on that unit project, okay? It is due Thursday by the end of class. It will not be accepted as late work, so please get it done. Email me if you have any questions, okay? Thanks, guys.